Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today is sage grouse. Right now, the state, as we found out in the last segment, is involved with the federal agencies, the state agencies, and local counties trying to come up with a plan to prevent a listing. So we're going to start the discussion of what a listing would mean, why it's coming about, and maybe some of the steps that we're taking and things that we all can do to help avert a listing. So I'm going to start by introducing our guest, Larry Christ, who is the field supervisor for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife here in the state of Utah, Mike McKee, a Uinta County Commissioner, and Director Juan Palma, the State Director of the Bureau of Land Management. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I guess I'll start right out with you, Larry.
Okay.
Does the U.S. Fish and Wildlife really want to just take charge of this and say, this is what you're going to do?
No. Simply no. Right now, the sage grouse is under the jurisdiction of the state. It's a candidate species at the moment, and so it is totally under state jurisdiction. There is no protection under the Endangered Species Act for it, and we'd frankly like to see it remain that way. What we are facing, though, is the fact that by September 2015, we have to do either a proposal to list the species or remove it from the candidate list. And so we're trying to encourage the states, both Utah and other states across the range, to come up with plans that help focus conservation on the sage grouse and show greater regulatory mechanisms if needed, but also focus mitigation and conservation activities that would preclude the need for actually listing of the species.
So, contrary to popular opinion, you don't want to gain control of everything that you can, because there's a myth about that.
I would absolutely not want that.
So I guess the next question then, in leading up to this, would go to you, Director Palma. This is also something that the listing is something that you don't want in your agency as well. How does this affect you and your decisions and management of the BLM?
Well, it certainly would affect us in the future, but let me just say first that we appreciate the state and the leadership of the governor and the leadership of the state staff that is trying to put together a program that would allow this wonderful bird to continue to survive, not only here in Utah, but across the region. From us, the BLM side, we want to be able to focus our energy in conserving and restoring some of the habitat for sage grouse. And we're doing that in many efforts. We can talk about some of those efforts that I'm really appreciative for. Collaborative efforts such as the Utah Partners for Conservation and Development. It's a wonderful group that is restoring over 1 million acres of land. Many of those lands really are restoring some of the habitat for sage grouse. So we from the BLM side want to focus our energies on that restoration and conservation of those lands.
Well, some of the critics of the study and the things leading up to the plan for the state have said that you're not taking into account lots of things, that the focus is being put on oil and gas, mineral development, it's being put on recreation, and it's been put on grazing. And that other factors in looking at the effect on the habitat have not been considered or not equally considered. Would any of you like to address that issue?
Well, I guess I'll jump in that, you know, throughout the state we have a number of what's been identified as sage grouse management units and local area work groups that work with each one of those units that are experts in their area. And so individually they've gone through and identified the main threats to those specific populations. And so, for instance, in the West Desert, fire is a really big threat, and it's being addressed. I think there's recommendations out there for unified fire commands and improving responses and ways to minimize the invasive species that are coming in plants, which is what's leading to the fire. So I think we really are addressing a lot of those. We are addressing oil and gas too, but we're also addressing a number of other different threats to the species, and it's all pretty specific to that individual population that we're talking about.
Now, Mike, this approach from your perspective as a county commissioner, this is handled differently, you think, than some of the other plans as far as how this is coming together?
Well, it is, and I appreciate the approach and the fact that this will be a bottom-up approach rather than a federal government approach coming down. If we're able to, you know, if this state plan is adopted, This will be a bottom-up approach. Larry mentioned the local working groups. These working groups in best knowing the issues in each individual area and what those threats and what those opportunities might be, how we give lift to the bird, and looking at areas where the sage grouse are best managed. And so, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, if these plans are adopted, they would be, it would have a county commission complex to it.
So I guess from the resource side, which is very important to you in Uinta County, you're looking at if the habitat comes under protection, even in the state plan, and there's an area for mineralogical development, or in another county, recreational opportunity or grazing opportunity, and those lands are taken off the table, is there some way that you can develop other lands and kind of do an acre for acre swap? I know that the BLM has done this in several cases of doing these mitigation arrangements with people who are prospecting for resources.
And you know, even prior to this plan that we're developing, part of our county plan talks about offsite mitigation. And so, you know, the state plan contemplates that there are areas, the birds are where the birds are. And the idea from my perspective of this plan is, let's take the areas where the best habitat, where the best bird populations are, protect those areas, see what we can do to give lift to those bird numbers, and target the resources so we get the best bang for the buck. There's other places, if there's one or two birds that's hanging around in an area that maybe they don't even belong, maybe it doesn't make sense to spend millions and millions of dollars in an area there that we would get very little lift to the bird, where we could put that resource into another area and really have some good things happen.
So go ahead, Larry.
Well, and I think I'll agree basically with that approach, with a little kind of variation in that, you know, the service, we're really interested in preserving populations kind of distributed throughout the state. We're not interested in, kind of as the Commissioner says, every single bird. You know, it may be that there's certain birds that are just going to fall out in areas that are not that of great a concern.
Basically, they're like runaways or something like that?
Well, I would just say there would be very low density areas where there's not much chance of recovering those populations or much chance of restoring those. But we are interested in having populations that are spread throughout the state, very much like they are now. But that's the reason for these sage grouse management units. We're focusing on those areas.
So in the final analysis, is it really a matter of the total number of birds? In other words, the health of the population generally distributed, or you know, it's more about the bird population and not so much of the acreage? I guess what I'm getting at is, if you can build that population up in you know, in a 100-acre area where you've got 3 or 4 leks, which are the nesting areas or the mating areas, are they, you know, and that population comes up, does that mean that you're less concerned about those fringe populations and some other uses may be available for that land?
I think what we're interested in is the populations and the habitat that supports them. That's what's really important. So the sage grouse is a landscape scale species. It covers a lot of area and it uses it back and forth. And so what we would like to see is healthy populations and a healthy sagebrush steppe habitat that supports them.
And that's where we, the BLM, come in. We have about 50% of the habitat, so that means that we have a clear mandate to make sure that our habitat is really in good shape.
Okay, I guess bottom line, the question that the counties might look at is, how much impact is that going to have on some of the things that they actually rely upon? You know, like their ranchers and grazing, and again, in your case, you know, oil and gas. How much is that going to restrict the ability for them to move after these resources? You
know, potentially it can have a tremendous effect, because if you have sage grouse in high resource areas, and you know, the management is prohibitive to that, it could have a tremendous impact.
We're going to take a break and come back with this conversation in just a minute here on the County Seat. Stay with us.
Have you ever wanted to go on a vacation to Mars? What about a visit to the Old West? Impossible, right? Well, forget what you think is real. In southern Utah's Kane County, other worlds are just an ATV ride away. The Old West lives on in every sunset. From the downtown streets of Little Hollywood to the vistas that have inspired the world, never find yourself closer to home and yet farther than you've ever been. Southern Utah's Kane County, where anywhere is possible.
Unlimited opportunity for adventure. It's all about knowing where to look. ATV adventures, rock crawling events, art festivals, and wildlife events. The opportunities are limitless. Pick your adventure in Miller County.
Industry is the symbol of Utah. Beauty is what makes it unique. Nowhere else are these two qualities exemplified like in Uinta County. Oil and gas extraction, pioneer history, the spirit of hard work and integrity that feed our state. Built in the middle of the most spectacular backdrop in the West, isn't it time you found the balance you've been looking for? Uinta County, Utah, where industry meets inspiration.